Welcome to LiberTea, the videocast series, European Liberal Forum project. I'm your host, Ricardo Silvestre. George Washington said, a primary object should be the education of our youth in the science of government. In a republic, what pieces of knowledge can be equally important? And what duty more pressing than communicate to the ones who are going to be future guardians of liberties in the country? Also, François Mitterrand say, the youth are not always right, but society which ignores them and beats them, it's always wrong. And to show us that youth is always right, I have with me Laia Comerma. Laia, thank you so much for coming to the videocast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Laia, it's the Events and Training Officer at LYMEC. LYMEC, the Pan-European Youth Organization from the ALDE Party and also Renew Europe at the European Parliament. And LYMEC seeks to promote liberal values through the European Union. There is the importance of young people to get involved in the political process, and that is to attend needs for the future, and that is, the environment, society, governance, liberties. So tell us your experience for someone that is working on a field.
I think it's very important to provide the appropriate spaces for the youth to be an active part of the conversation. It cannot be only figurative, because we're going to live the decisions that politics decides today. So we are the future generation in a society that is changing more rapid than it has ever done. We have the quick speed of digitalization, of innovations in artificial intelligence, and this is going to change the way not only that we act with each other, but that we think. So I think it's very important to have a profound debate on how do we want those societies to look like in the future. Also, with the spread of polarization, we see that every time more and more we're defined by what differentiates us and not what unites us. And this is something that we care a lot in LYMEC. We try to find what actually we can fight together. And so we think that it's important to be an active part of the conversation. For this, we have a lot of internal discussions, and then we try to be as open as we can to actually provide insights to policymakers in Europe. So, for example, we were very disappointed when there were the negotiations of the Next Generation EU fund because the youth were not involved at all. Mm-hmm. And it's very important because this fund is supposed to define how the youth is going to recover from the post-COVID crisis, which is a profound change. So we believe that was not the appropriate way to go, but we tried to remediate that. And for example, we sent a letter to President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, to express our priorities about the Conference for the Future of Europe. And we made also our discontent public in internet because she said that the youth would be involved in sports and festivities. We believe that the youth is much more than that.
Exactly.
So yeah, we try to discuss it. We have a presence in all over Europe, so we believe that we have a comprehensive analysis in everything that is happening in all the corners of the EU.
Very good. I was very interested in something you said, and that is the speed of change, the way things are changing. There's a gap, a generational gap between people like you and myself, which I hope it's not that much of a gap, but there's a little bit. So tell us how to observe that phenomena, people like myself, my generation and other generations from your eyes. So when you're thinking about young people dealing with all these changes, what can you tell us regarding that?
I don't think it's that much what divide us, this gap that you're mentioning, but we have much more that unite us. In the end, your generation was the one responsible for building the world that we live in today. At least you took this effort from the previous generation and so forth and so forth. And now we have to continue that. But in the end, when you think about it, the values, the principles that govern our societies are the same. They haven't changed that much. We have been adapting them, but I would argue that those are the same that were governing maybe the ancient Greek society when democracy was born. Of course, they have evolved incredibly, but we still believe in democracy. We still believe in human rights, in freedom, in those are the values that govern all the policies that we define. And when we make them specific, and we consider every specific case, then is when maybe we can see what's the gap no, between how we have to do things now and how they were used to be done maybe 50 years ago or 20 years ago even. But in the end, I think it's about finding what unites us and then discussing how we can make this possible, and we can make everything possible if.
Well, we definitely need your help, the younger generations, to lead us in the right path. And it was very interesting that you were saying about the defense of freedoms, and this videocast is about liberty and individual freedoms. And those are clearly associated with liberal values. So that's bringing me to the second question to you, and that is, you're talking about the importance of youth, and let's go a step forward, and the importance of liberal youth. So, and before we get into LYMEC, because I really want to do this, but tell us, in your opinion, then that jump from the importance of being active as a young person worried about the world, and then being a young liberal worried about the world.
I think that my generation is the most worried, most involved one maybe ever. We have been through a period of profound disaffection with politics, and now we see movements like Fridays for Future, like Black Lives Matter, and those are all sparked by young people. So we see that young people care, and we have broken a taboo that was very present in our societies. Young people don't care. Before, young people used to do this and that. I don't think you can argue this anymore. And we, in the liberal youth, we care about protecting the freedoms of every person in Europe. And I think this is a task that is very important, that someone pays attention to what's happening, because, for example, we have to care about what happens, even though we live in Portugal, in Greece, in Bulgaria. We have to care about what happens in Hungary, in Poland, in the UK, because it affects us directly and indirectly. So, for example, when Hungary promotes an anti-LGBTIQ law, we have to counter. We have to fight back against this, because if they undermine the freedom of this group in Hungary, they undermine it all over Europe, because they undermine our voice in the world. And it's the same for women's rights. We have to protect the right to abortion, the right to work and have the same opportunities as men, to close the gender gap in salaries, etc., etc. So I think that liberal youth is the youth that cares about all this and doesn't stay silent, but actually gets involved in their national countries or in Europe, like LYMEC, and tries to collaborate in the conversation.
Very good. That, before we move from another topic, let's stay here for a minute, and that is, from people that are outside looking at the young generation doing this kind of work that you said is very important, do you feel optimistic? Do you think you're going in the right direction? Of course, there's a lot of work to do, and there is a lot of work to do, but tell us how you feel that, where things are going.
I'm a profound optimist, so I guess that biases my answer, but I do believe that the liberal collective is optimist per se, because we're not driven by problems, we're driven by solutions. We analyze the problems, we see them, but we ask, what can we do about it? What's the possible solution, and we start defining an action plan. So when you're solution driven, you have to be an optimist, because otherwise you just stay in the criticism part of the answer. And I do believe that in the end our societies are profoundly liberal. They just, in some countries they don't know it yet, in others they vote liberal, but I do believe that the liberal values are the ones that drive the biggest changes in our societies towards progress.
Laia, those are fascinating points, and you were just mentioning the dynamics between us living in Portugal or in Spain or in Greece, and then facing other realities inside the European Union. Poland is a good example, Hungary is a good example, Bulgaria is a good example that you just gave. But I think there's another work to be done, and tell me what you think about this. Many MAPs that we follow, and even from Renew Europe, they do mention, for example, when we're talking about commerce, trade, human rights, that the European Union should export their values. So tell us, is there a legitimacy for us to do that? Can we export to the rest of the world some of the European values that are so cherished to us liberals?
I think that there are two sides of this question. One is the internal one, that is actually the one that builds the legitimacy that you mentioned, and the other one is the external one. I do believe that the EU as a global actor has the responsibility to not only to export those values, but to protect them where they exist. So I do believe that we have to keep in contact with, for example, civil society in Hong Kong, civil society in Russia, in China, because we have to work with the civil society there, because they are not their government and they suffer the consequences of their government. So this is something that we are very conscious. In LYMEC, for example, we had a project this year where we discussed the future of diplomacy in the EU, how we have to reform it from the structural point of view, but also from taking into consideration the geopolitical side of it and the various sectors that are most important in our diplomacy, because now diplomacy is becoming more and more multifaceted. So there's this side that is very important, and we can expand of it, but then you mentioned the legitimacy, and the legitimacy comes from internal politics. So I think that we have to be much more strict than we are now in protecting the rule of law, in protecting human rights inside the EU. Because when we have violations of those principles inside our nation states, this undermines our legitimacy when we go outside and speak of the EU as the house of democracy, of freedom. So I think that it's the first step to have this mechanism to evaluate the rule of law and those reports, but we have to go much farther than that and be more strict. And also have some kind of enforcement mechanisms, because it cannot be just words. The application of our Article 7 to Hungary was one card on the table, but in the end, it's not. We don't have to wait to have such an extreme case as Hungary to act. So it's about taking care of what we have, being more strict inside, and then having this role as the EU as a global actor.
Laia, let's stay with youth diplomacy. Actually, our last episode that you can find online, we were talking about LGBTIQ diplomacy. Now we can go a step further even, and that is to think about reaching the rest of the world. So we're just talking about the European Union and, of course, the conditions to have our house in order before we start exporting our ideas to outside the old continent. But when you're thinking about Africa, Asia, even South America, tell us, what do you think about that kind of endeavor?
In LYMEC, we care a lot about what happens outside the European Union, because in the end we live in a globalized world, so having stability and prosperity all around the world, it's very important for us as well. So we discuss every Congress, multiple resolutions on all those topics, but also we try to build those personal connections. So I myself lived in Hong Kong. I know many people fighting for democracy and human rights there, getting in trouble a bit, but I guess that's what you have to do. Yes, we try to build those connections, help them when we can. Also, we collaborate very closely with IFLRI, which is the International Liberal Youth, and they, of course, work with African organizations, with Latin American organizations, trying to promote liberalism in those areas, and we try to find as many synergies as we can with them. And apart from that, being this kind of think tank that can bring forward to the policymakers that you mentioned, that they are working on international trade, on international relations inside the European Parliament, be their think tank and come up with policy proposals to how they can answer the threats coming from those countries, and try to help these people, because in the end it's about the people that live there, as we mentioned, and we have to try to help them.
Laia, we've been talking about LYMEC for some time now, and just to remember, it's a pan-European youth organization that is associated with the ALDE party and also with the Renew Europe group in the European Parliament. And the objective is to promote liberal values, liberal ideas, and a liberal governance. So tell us a little bit about what the organization does, what kind of work you do on the field.
So in LYMEC, what we do is we group liberal youth organizations all over Europe, not only in the EU, but also in Europe, non-EU countries. And we bring them together to discuss about those issues, and then we try to help them by working on the ground. So in LYMEC, we have a lot of in-house expertise. We can promote the exchange of best practices, maybe help one another. We collaborate when in one country there is a campaign, a political campaign. Other member organizations can help to, explain the liberal proposals in that country, and we help them with the campaigning now mostly in social media, because it's a very important channel.
It's the place to be
nowadays. So basically it's about working on the ground. I believe it to be the most important part of our job, but also being this forum, bringing people together, realizing how much we have in common, because sometimes we're so focused in our national politics that we become a bit short-sighted, and we don't realize that we're all fighting for the same causes, maybe with different variations. But I think that when we all get together in our congresses, in our events, in our trainings, that we will speak more when we speak about ELF as well, we'll realize how much we have in common, and we can find synergies to help each other. But I believe that we're trying to help our member organizations, which are more than 60, counting full members and associate members, but at the same time expand and try to help liberalism grow in the countries that maybe don't have such strong movements, maybe like Portugal, like Greece, like Italy. So we try to help those countries as well from Europe and going there on the ground.
Wonderful. So that's the macro perspective. Let's go into the micro perspective. And let's say for the people that are listening to us right now and watching this conversation, what can they do? And you just mentioned, and it's really important, it's not only the European Union, it's also outside the European Union, but in Europe. And we can even expand to other neighbor regions. So if someone that is listening to this and thinking, I would like to work, I would like to participate, what can they do?
There's two ways that they can participate. The first one is directly with LYMEC. They can become individual members. They can go to our website, and there's the option to become an individual member. It's very cheap, and this way they have access to everything that we do, to our congresses, to our events, etc., etc. So this is one option if they are interested in what LYMEC does from the EU perspective. Otherwise, if they care mostly on what happens in their national countries, I would advise them to get informed about the liberal options in their own party system, and maybe or contact LYMEC and ask if there's a member organization in the country that they come from, and we can direct them to the relevant people, and they can get involved at the national level as well. Of course, those two levels are not incompatible. We have a lot of members of our member organizations that then become individual members themselves to have their own voice in LYMEC that is not channeled through the youth organization. So those are not incompatible, but I guess it depends on the priorities of each person.
We're going to put all this information on the show notes of this episode on YouTube, so please follow LYMEC. Laia, the other thing that I wanted to talk to you, it's about two families that work together and they're very close, which is the European Liberal Forum and the LYMEC as the organization for the youth liberals. And also because we have one of the same entry points, which is the ALDE Forum. So tell us how fruitful it is, this relationship between these two organizations.
Well, specifically within my portfolio in the bureau, which is events and training,
yes, exactly.
I collaborate very closely with the European Liberal Forum. We organize multiple events throughout the year on topics of EU interest for our members. Basically, we organize all kind of events from publications, book publications, to skill trainings for our members, to debates on trade, on foreign policy, on human rights, on minority rights, etc., etc. And we organize those all over Europe with the help of and the expertise of ELF, of course. So yeah, basically it's about collaborating on issues that interest us both as European organizations, and organize events all over Europe for our members to participate in.
Okay, so not only follow LYMEC, but you can follow LYMEC through the European Liberal Forum. Laia, this was fantastic. So good to have you here on LiberTea, on our videocast series. And do you want to leave us one last positive, youthful, irreverent message how to deal with your generation that is going to take over the world?
I think that the message that I would like to leave our viewers with is get involved. If you care, we want to hear your voice. Wherever you live in the EU, your voice matters, because there's so much that unites us, and it's important that we make each voice count. For example, now we have been given the platform that the Conference for the Future of Europe is, and we are the future of Europe, so our voice is a must in that conversation. From LYMEC side, we will be incredibly active. We will put all our proposals in the platform to have them discussed in the Parliament. So if you're interested, you can also go to the platform for the Future of Europe and like our proposals, which are already up. And apart from this, I would say that we have to focus on what brings us together as youth, rather than what separates us. And we try to work also with other liberal youth families from other political parties, because in the end, as we said, the problems are for all of us. And even if we may disagree on the potential solutions, in the end we have to have this conversation and stop the polarization that is driving our societies into a vicious circle that I would say brings us to nowhere. So let's fight all together for democracy, for freedom, for human rights, at home in the EU, but also outside.
I've been talking with Laia Comerma. She's the Events and Training Officer in LYMEC, and as you can see, we're in good hands. Laia, thank you so much for coming to LiberTea, the videocast series.
Thank you very much for inviting me.